already. All right, we're off to a good start. We're definitely off to a good start considering my opening slide looks like I just woke up and I'm hungover and having existential crisis. But we've had a packed night. We're going to try to get out of here pretty quickly, so I'm going to do a lightning round as quickly through this as I can. A lot of technical information. I'm going to go in the other direction and kind of talk about managing your projects. And so first we're going to start off with who am I? My name is Dev Jana. As Anna said, I'm one of the instructors and software engineers at Prime Digital Academy during the day, during the week. This is where I teach full stack development. This was a picture you might recognize from the Stribs business section for something they did on Prime recently. There's a little Linux penguin on the floor there. On the nights and weekends, which I also call my superhero alter ego, I am the president of Code and Noises at Dev and Ari. We're just a two-man team, myself and my business partner here, Ari. We went to grad school together. We make nonviolent 3D video games. Incidentally, the one we're working on right now is called Newt 1. We just won Best Visuals at Gamers Rhapsody 3 2 weekends ago, and we're talking about how to get that out. Incidentally, that's being made with a game engine called Unity, and about 95% of the code is in JavaScript. It's not what I'm here to talk about. Just wanted to say, like, I do actually do that stuff. But I'm here to talk about project management. So my background in project management, formerly was project manager at Image Metrics, technical director of R&D at Preferred Interactive, technical director at BioLucid, and I've also taught at a bunch of colleges. Like I said, the lightning round. That's who am I? How did I get here? I started out growing up in Erie, Pennsylvania. I got my comp sci degree, got my master's in 3D animation special effects in Boca Raton, Florida. Then I moved up here a little bit over 10 years ago, where I started teaching college and started programming games, released a couple of small indie games, and moved out to Phoenix, where I taught at a different college. This was when the mobile devices started actually happening. I worked on some of the first iPhone games back when that was the only iOS device, Objective-C. It was terrible back then. It was the Wild West. Then I moved all the way up to Burlington, Vermont, where I was a professor at Champlain College in the game design department for a couple years. Oh, I also worked on the Stargate game when I was in Phoenix in 2010. And I moved up to Burlington and taught at a college up there for a couple years and released a couple indie games and talked at a couple places. Then I moved down to Sarasota, Florida, where I was the technical director at BioLucid, where we did 3D iPad applications for the medical industry. And this was where I really started identifying bizarre problems and holes in how processes work with teams. While some of the leadership was there, I was a technical director, the art director was there, and the CTO was in the building, and so was our art team. But our development team, with whom, as the technical director, I dealt with most, was in the Ukraine. And our science lead, because it was mostly medical apps, our science lead was in San Diego, and our business team was in New York, and our clients were in Seattle. Our main money clients were on a different side of the country. So dealing with all that stuff, yeah, we were releasing apps, and we had proprietary CMS. We were releasing apps in places like India and China and the US and stuff. It was a lot with which to deal, and I started recognizing at this point where some bizarre holes start to happen in teams. Then I moved back here. For a little bit over a year, I was the technical director of R&D at Preferred Interactive, where we did interactive, thus the name, Preferred Interactive, architectural and interior rendering. Scott was my boss while I was there. He was a pretty cool boss. Most of it was Ruby on Rails for me at the time. It was a little bit different. And I was highly involved in like putting some structure around our processes at that point in time. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Then I moved out to LA for a little bit for the last couple years, where I was the project manager at Image Metrics, which is probably best known for the facial animation on Benjamin Button and Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead Redemption and stuff. But while I was there, we were working on augmented reality 3D facial animation apps for mobile devices. And our main client was L'Oreal Paris. So if you search L'Oreal Paris, you can put like virtual makeup on your face and buy it. And that was something that we did. We also used that tech to do like zombie apps and stuff like that. So I was involved with a bunch of that. Look Up Turned. It's a great zombie app. That's the one with which I was most involved. I absolutely loved it. But there, our web dev team and our app development team were on site with myself, the lead dev, and the VP of product in the LA office, but our research department was over in Manchester, UK. So obviously L'Oreal Paris is in Paris. So then once again, dealing with those projects and trying to figure out how do we work optimally in that many different time zones with those many personalities was a whole different ball game. And then just this March, I moved back here. It was actually the day before St. Patrick's Day when I arrived back here in beautiful Minneapolis, Minnesota. And as you can see, in my life at least, all roads lead to Minnie. So I'm here now. I don't plan on going anywhere else. We actually drove for all of those moves, so it was a bit rough. But so I started teaching at Prime, which is where I work now. I love it there. If I look cold, it's because I am cold. I'm still not used to this. I think it's going to take me a winter until my blood thickens up again. But so why am I here? I'm going to try to help you better prep and manage for your projects. So again, we're going to kind of scale back from the code and talk about how you're going to deal with your projects, specifically with small teams or virtual teams, acquaint or reacquaint you with some Agile project management techniques and ideas, introduce you to the basics of GitHub Projects, which GitHub rolled out in just, I believe it was September. It was mid-September. And I know I have some students in here who were in my class at that time, and I had a month or two before actually had a dream that there were that there was a Scrum board available to me in GitHub. So it was literally a dream come true when GitHub Projects was released. And I'm going to try to keep it as not boring as possible. So well, what is happening? I believe that a program is a solution to a problem. And that if you don't understand your problem correctly, you're not prepped fully for it, things are going to go wrong. And so some of the solutions to that are just Agile is a big subject. So we're just going to talk about some corners of it and some ways that you can apply it pretty quickly. Look at some of the tools. Specifically, we're going to be talking about using a Kanban or a Scrum board inside of GitHub Projects. And I've got some stretch goals, time permitting. I had no idea what was going to happen when I came in. So I built this dumb little web app in vanilla.js. Cause I was like, well, it's JavaScript Minnesota. I come in, it's Elm and Vue, and I'm like, why did I not? I started doing it in Angular. I was like, oh, I better do it in vanilla.js because I think it's going to be just JavaScript. So the code for this, including the project with which I will demo some of this stuff, it is on GitHub, and I will tweet that out and mention JavaScript Minnesota, and also put it in the Slack channel. So
make sure we retweet you too.
Thank you. Retweet. At least one heart. So who here uses GitHub? All right, that's what I was expecting. It's at least 90% of the people here. And what I want to do is just make sure that everybody has an opportunity to take a look at what's going to happen. And before we get into the solutions, let's talk about what some of the problems are. Because I think IDing what your problems are and what they could be are really, really important. These are the three main pillars that I've noticed that happen with groups of people when they're working on specifically development-heavy projects. Issues get lost to the ether. We have feature creep. We've got design holes. And what that can lead to is big balls of mud. So an issue that's lost to the ether, I consider this some of those issues that you have this great idea, someone else agrees with you, someone else on the team agrees with you, and then 2 months later, after you've delivered or you've deployed to production, you're sitting around, you're like, we were going to do that, right? Oh, yeah, we were. And you just never did it. It just kind of got lost in the ether. I think most of us have gone through that. Usually that's because it was improperly prioritized, and as a result, it wasn't documented correctly. Sometimes you want to start working on something, and somebody jingles their keys in front of you, and you're like, oh, I'm going to go down that hole. And you just kind of move away from it. And sometimes they just are forgotten. The ones where at the end of the project, you're like, oh, weren't we going to do that? Those are actually the lucky ones, because some of them just disappear. And if you embrace some very, very simple tactics to document your stuff, you can help avoiding that. We've got feature creep. So feature creep is what happens when the could voices shout down the should voices. So should we do this or could we do this are two completely different things. Could we do something really complex that would be really interesting and be a big challenge for us as developers? Yes, in any situation we could. Should we? Probably not. We have to deliver this tonight. Yeah. So this often complicates your design and introduces late-stage bugs. It usually complicates your design a lot more than anticipated because it wasn't a part of your original feature set. And as a result, when you graft it on, you don't really have a sense of how it's going to affect the rest of your system. So these doubly screw up your plans. Not only do they derail you while you're getting seduced by this new feature or this new standard, or something like the new, adding a new record now is a red circle with a plus button on it. And I don't know, but you might be like, oh, we need to refactor everything to do that. It's like, should we? I don't know. Could we? Yes. But you might not really realize how that's going to affect the rest of the user experience or the rest of the interface. So they can derail in your time and in your focus, and they can also completely derail your design. And you won't usually find out about that until a little bit later. Oh, hold on. I wanted to show in feature creep. The Urban Dictionary definition of feature creep is from 2004, and it's got this great example from 2004. Oh, we could add TCP/IP remote management. And yeah, we need to make sure it has a standard SNMP interface and metrics analysis. And it's like, hey guys, it's just a screensaver. Like but we've all, I think, experienced that at some point in time. It's like, let's roll it back and figure out what is the problem that our program is addressing. Ooh. What is the problem that our program is addressing, and are we actually addressing it by adding this feature? Is it necessary? Design holes often get confused for or mistaken for feature creepers, but they're not. These are when your design did not actually address the problem at hand, and so you have to add a feature later because of this oversight in design. I wrote here, like, much like black holes, design holes, they're like really difficult to see at first, but the event horizon is hard to ignore. You're like, something's going on there. I can't see what the problem is, but something's going on, and then usually you're like, oh, we got a problem here. An example that I like to give here is if you're in your negotiations, in your collaborations with your client, they're saying something like, oh yeah, and for an admin role or a manager role, we would like the manager to be able to disable users. And it's like, oh, that's great. But you didn't collaborate with them enough, you didn't discuss what that design actually means enough, and you find out that what they mean is they want to suspend users and then be able to re-enable them later. Maybe they want to keep that data for analytics, or they just want to be nice and let people back in the door. And what you have written is something that actually deletes them from the database because that was the easiest thing to do at that point in time. In that case, your design didn't address the problem, and it becomes a design hole. You have to add this feature later on. Usually it's like, oh, we're releasing tomorrow. Where's the re-enable button? How do I let somebody back in? You're like, okay, how do we do that? And often you go into some really uncomfortable contract renegotiations there. So all of those can lead to having a big ball of mud. And a big ball of mud is a piece of software that has little or no underlying architecture or high-level design, and it usually does feel like that when you're working with it. I learned about big balls of mud from this blog post. Look how old this is, 1999. It's going to be hard to read, but it has an excellent definition right here, which is a big ball of mud is a haphazardly structured, sprawling, sloppy, duct tape and baling wire spaghetti code jungle. We've all seen them. These systems show unmistakable signs of unregulated growth and repeated expedient repair. That last line, I think, says a lot about problems with the design. And I think we've all seen one of those or been a part of one of those. If what you're doing is consistently rushing to fix something, there's inherently a problem with the design early on. I'm going to close that page because that is reminding me of GeoCities or something. That was really ugly. So the solutions are one of the potential solutions. I'm going to talk about some Agile practices. We're going to look at some Scrum boards, talk about what columns and tickets are, defining a workflow, which I think is a step that a lot of places really overlook, does not take long to do correctly, and can save you literally months of anxiety throughout your life. And we're going to look specifically at GitHub Projects. We'll talk about some other tools. So Agile was apparently come across or defined by a group of people in Utah, I believe in the 90s. Their manifesto is pretty simple. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. This mandates a couple things. First, you have to have a pretty good team. You have to trust your team, and you have to let your team do its work and come up with its work at points in time. This is where, like, people who are directors as opposed to managers sometimes thrive in a situation like this, because you can direct the team, allow them to do some of their work. The second one I think is perhaps the most important, which is working software over comprehensive documentation. The easiest way to make this like real and a reality for you is to recognize that a working proof of concept or really early MVP will say a lot more about what that project and that product can do than any design document could ever do. For specifically when you put it down in front of a client. If you've got something that you can plug it in and actually use it and touch things, show the client that this is how it's going to work, they will understand that a lot better, and it's not as intimidating as some giant design document. Additionally, this will help show your design holes earlier. It'll help expose them because you'll start realizing, maybe they'll ask, well, where's the re-enable button for disabled users? You'll start seeing that a little bit early. That goes back to customer collaboration over contract negotiation. If you can collaborate a little bit early on, get your design to be a little bit more airtight early on, you should have no problems with this. and responding to change over following a plan. So the concept here is sticking to a plan is a great idea, but if you have a crap plan, you're not going to have a pretty good product. So you have to be able to move around. I think that's the definition of Agile. Correct me if I'm wrong. 3 of the main proper nouns about which we're going to talk are epics, stories, and tasks. A lot of folks are nodding, so this is very familiar, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with them, you can think of an epic as a large kind of sub-project of your main project. Then stories are often called user stories, and we can think of these as...
Is it like the Odyssey and Iliad? Like that kind of epic?
Those would be sub-projects of the larger Homer project. So you could actually look at them in that way. So epics are these large kind of sub-projects of your main project. Stories, we often hear them called user stories, and usually when you're writing your user stories, when you're designing your project, they start with I want this, and I always feel like a little 3-year-old, like I want this when I'm putting those together, but they're actually really, really helpful to guide your project. And then you've got tasks, and the tasks support the stories which are part of the epic. So to make that a little bit more concrete, the example that I always use is authentication could be an epic that is part of a large project. So you're developing a CMS or some type of internal project for a client. They want to have authentication. That's great. That's a big sub-project of the larger project. So that's the epic is authentication. Then your user stories might be something simple like I want to log in. I want to log out. I want to be able to register as a new user. So let's take register as a new user, which is a story within the epic of authentication. It'll have supporting tasks, maybe for a front-end developer on building out the form or the interface to enter the information, maybe for a back-end developer or an API person and hooking that into something that already exists to get them into the system. So you've got your epics, which are big, authentication, story, I want to register as a new user, and tasks, which usually go to the developers. Sometimes those tasks get broken up into subtasks. Agile is great for like continuous development and like when is a website ever actually done. And it's great for virtual teams. Obviously, I'm a big fan of that. One of the like main columns, specifically that I'm going to focus on today, is the Scrum board. And if you recognize each of these cards, or I like to call them tickets, this is what we're going to look at later today. That's a GitHub project. Each of these cards is a ticket, so that could be a task or a story, and then the columns define the status of that ticket. So probably the simplest here is this is a to-do column. These are to-do. When they're being worked on, they get dragged into work in progress. When they're done, they get dragged into done. And over on the left, I always keep something that I call ignored, or I usually call it the freezer. It's like I'm just going to freeze that. Maybe I'm never going to deal with it. Maybe we're going to come back to it if we've got time. Maybe it's a stretch goal, but I don't want to throw it out. I want to keep it. The physical ones, I'm actually a big fan of the physical Scrum or Kanban boards where we've got your columns on a whiteboard and everybody actually looks at it. You can look over and you can see everything is moving over in this direction, and we can see the project actually. It's like the opposite of a burn down chart if you're familiar with that. So you start actually physically seeing the project manifest itself on that board. It's also really cathartic when you've been struggling with a bug and you can grab that thing, you can just smack it on the board as hard as you can without breaking it. The head of QA at my previous job when he was young was a professional breakdancer, and he would like take them off and like do a little dance and stick them over when it was a really difficult task. It was great. So the physical one and the virtual one, they both do different things. I think they're both extraordinarily useful. We're going to be talking about the virtual one a little bit later. Defining a workflow. I talked earlier about like to do, in progress, done. That's great. That sounds wonderful in theory, but nothing actually works like that. And after a few years, I've kind of settled on this as the simplest possible workflow for any place that has both development and QA. So in this situation, you create a ticket. It starts out as open. In our happy path, we're going to move directly to the right. It's open. It either gets assigned to a developer or a developer claims it out of that pool, becomes a work in progress. He or she finishes that code. It gets resolved on their local code base, gets merged to master, at which point QA can check the state of the entire project. If it passes QA, it gets QA verified and can eventually be deployed. If it does not pass QA, QA can reopen it. It'll go back to being open. When a task is open, it can also be ignored and go into ignored, in which case it can be reopened. So this is, I believe, as linear as I can get something like this. And if you take a look at what this looks like right now, just look at the boxes themselves. This gives you the beginnings of the layouts of the columns as they would be on a Scrum board or Kanban board if you're going to use this type of workflow. So we could have ignored on the left, open, work in progress, resolved, in QA, QAV, sometimes in QA. If you can think of in QA as also a substitute for that could be in code review and as past code review. So those are two other things that could go here. I believe that taking the time to talk with your team about your workflow is extraordinarily important. I've walked into places where I've worked and it's been like, so what's your workflow like? And nobody really has an answer, and spent at least a month watching where the data goes, who people talk to, even like watching chat and going, whoa, that went all the way over there. And then eventually going into my boss and going, I think this is how things are going. And it literally looks like, a 5-year-old just scribbled sometimes. So if you can take the time to do this and come to a consensus with your team, you might be able to save yourself quite a lot of time. There are some other Scrum board tools. Trello is a free one. It's great. I know a ton of people that use it. I love Jira. I spent a couple years in it. Atlassian has a great set of tools. It's not free, but if you can get your hands on like Jira, they have Bitbucket for source control and Confluence for documentation and HipChat for chat. And the Atlassian ecosystem it's actually, I very much enjoyed working with it. But we're going to focus on GitHub Projects. And well, there's really nothing to that slide. We're just going to go over to this project. So this is the project. This is the repo for the dumb little app that I'm using. And if you haven't used GitHub Projects yet, you have this cool new tab up here called Projects. And if we click on that, it'll list a number of projects. So if you wanted to, you could have multiple projects going on within the same repo. And I have my oh, hey. So I assigned this to Ben, and he moved it to in progress. So he's going to actually close a ticket at some point in time while we're doing this demo. That's fantastic. So I've got my unsatisfactory workflow here. I've got my to-do work in progress done. So one of the main things that we need to do is just learn how to create a column. It's pretty easy. Add a column. I'm going to call this the freezer. And you can just drag this over, do whatever you want to do with it. So what are some of the things I want to go in the freezer? I've labeled these things as stretch goals. I'm just going to move them over. Anything that is a stretch goal, if time permits, and we've been pretty packed here tonight, so I might not get to any of those. We'll actually deal with a little bit. So I've created a column. I've shown you guys how to create a column. I usually use a mouse. I'm going to zoom out just a hair so we can see everything on there. I'll show you guys how to create a ticket. It's actually pretty straightforward. There's a couple ways that you can create a ticket. The probably most roundabout, but the most used one is to actually go into issues, create a new issue, give it a title, say because I just did. Submit that issue, and now if I go back to my project, wait, it's not there. This is one of the things that confuses people when they first start using it, is that a ticket and a card are kind of interchangeable. So what I want to actually do is add cards, and then I can drag it over into the specific column. There's one called Delete Me. So now that we've talked about that, I have said so I'm going to close that. And now that we've talked about creating tickets, there's another way that you can create a ticket, and it involves converting a note to a ticket. You can see how this is a full issue, and it has a status and a label. This is just a note, and it's just some text. It doesn't have much else in it. It's very easy to just click on it on its the top right contextual menu, convert it to an issue. Give it a description. It's now a ticket. I can move that over. Done. Rather than going all the way to issues, creating one, I can just click this to add a note. Add the note. Now that it's there, I can close this back up, and I can convert this to an issue. So if you're in an actual meeting, you can do this pretty quickly. Done pretty quickly. And that is now complete. Work in progress. I I have not assigned the say ticket to myself. As you can see, some of these are assigned. There's a couple different ways that we can do that. I'm going to bring over work in progress, assign tickets to work in progress. And one of the easiest ways is to click on the ticket itself. Down here in assignees, I can say assign to myself. Or I can click on assignees and I can choose any of the folks who are part of the project. So I'm just going to assign this to myself because And then if I head back to my project, say is assigned to me. So we've talked about saying assigning a ticket and creating tickets. Already I'm starting to see my work in progress start to get lower. My to-do list is getting a lot smaller.
I
Yes?
see you using a mouse because we can all see it happening and that kind of stuff, right? But are there key codes?
I don't believe that there are yet. And I don't know if you can access this via the CLI yet. I really don't. But yeah.
I'm still not using the CLI.
Well, yeah.
This seems kind of funny.
I agree. Thus using the mouse and not knowing if it will work in the CLI. So I can already see that my to-do list is getting smaller, my done list is getting bigger, starting to work out pretty well. I've got one last thing here, which is labeling. Labeling is actually like buried in a bizarre spot. So the labeling here is all these things that are labeled as a demo or labeled as stretch goals. Those are labels that I've added. We actually have to go into the Issues tab and then click on Labels and then click New Label to create a new label. It's kind of odd, but I know that I'm going to also have a closing, and the closing is going to go last, so I'm going to give it red for stop. So now I've got a new label called Closing, which I can apply to my tickets. Labeling should be in work in progress right now. So there's a few things that I can do in my summary. One of the other things that I wanted to add was next steps. This is going to be part of the closing. Just to review, converting that into an issue. So I can apply a label to any of these pretty easily. If I go into next steps, I can assign it to myself, click on labels, choose closing. Now it is labeled as such. Go back to the project. It's labeled as closing. Additionally, we can go to issues, and I'm going to have a quick summary and retrospective at the end, and I can just select a couple of them, Asia, and then choose the label that I would like to use. We'll think for a second, and those will now be labeled.
Can you have multiple labels?
Yes, you can have multiple labels on them, and it comes baked in with like bug ignored and stuff like that. I just wanted it to be clean for this particular talk. Trying to go as quick as possible. Yes.
What are the notes actually a good use case for? Because every time you've done it, you made a note and you instantly made it into a ticket.
Oh, I've actually used notes maybe twice.
Yeah, okay.
Because you can't leave, the thing with notes is you can't leave comments inside of the notes, and you can't assign the notes. So, I mean, I guess it might be a nice thing to leave at the top of the column and be like, this is describing the other things in the column, like use them as stickies within the column.
This seems like something where if they did have hotkeys and things like that, you could just fire off a whole bunch of notes.
Yes.
Later turn them into stories or
Yeah.
tickets or whatever.
That would be great. And this is in its infancy. It's only like 2.5 months old, so I'm hoping that GitHub, it becomes kind of a mature platform. There's a couple other things that I would really, really like to see in here that I don't actually see in here yet. So that kind of concludes the demo portion of this. Again, I'm trying to go as quickly as possible. It's already 8 o'clock.
So then I'll slow you down.
What's the use case for an issue that's not a card? Like, do all your issues end up becoming cards?
No, you can keep some in there like as a backlog. And I've done that a lot. It's like I only want to have the ones that are out here that we're working on for this sprint, because I can also have multiple projects. So there can be issues that aren't on this board that are on, when I go back to projects here, I can have a separate board that's maybe like a sprint that's for like the back-end team. And then those cards are just held in the I think we were saying issues that aren't on any boards. Is that correct?
Yeah, because I'm just trying to figure out how to keep track of, did I make that into a card? If it's not on the card, do I have to go look at the issues? And it seems like the back and forth might be a little bit confusing.
And it absolutely can be. So the way that GitHub Projects is set up right now is more of like a Kanban style where you don't even have like a backlog, and it just, you can't really even, if I actually go in and physically close these tickets,
Yeah.
they stay on the board unless I like choose to remove them.
Oh, okay.
So what I would usually do is create a new project per sprint. So in that case, you probably always have some tickets in the backlog that are not on the board. Do I really need to slow down? Am I talking
No,
way too fast?
I was tripping you up.
Okay.
Yeah, you got plenty of time.
Till 8:32?
And 33 seconds.
All right, awesome. Oops, I clicked that a little bit too hard. So that means that I've got time to do some stretch goals. So we'll talk about these very, very quickly. Stand-up, swim lanes, PERT charts, critical path, and the mythical man month. Stand-ups, I think, are like one of the most important things that you could do. For those of you who have not done them, they should be time boxed to about 15 minutes. They should be short and inclusive. Talk about what are you doing today, what did you do yesterday, what blockers do you have. They shouldn't happen at your desks. They should happen in some space. Nobody should take notes. It should be kind of informal. The concept there is to keep people talking, have them understand where everybody else is in a very soft way that doesn't get put into some wiki that nobody reads anyway. You'd be surprised how often at the end of stand-up someone would be like, oh, I can totally help you with that. Let's talk about that this afternoon. And that can alleviate a lot of those problems where a developer gets stuck, what I call banging up against a brick wall by themselves for a long time. And I'm not sure why, but stand-ups always seem to start to like evaporate when you're in this stage that I call spiraling the drain. When you're getting to the end of a project, good or bad, and everything's just going really fast, everybody's like, oh, I have to work, I gotta work really hard, I don't wanna go to stand-ups. That's when they're needed the most, and those 10, 15 minutes that you spend, like not just talking about the work, but also commiserating and bonding with your teammates can pay you back multiple times that time throughout the day. Take a 10-minute shorter lunch as a result and go to the freaking stand-up that morning. And there's no reason for them not to be fun. I used to actually start stand-ups with like, I would just blast Marley's stand-up. It was Marley Mondays and it was Luda Tuesdays. You know, it was like stand up every Tuesday. That's how we started the day. Swim lanes, while they kind of look like, I prefer vertical swim lanes. While they kind of look like a Scrum board, what these shows the overall flow for an entire project. Columns indicate teams and technology responsibilities. So for instance, one column could be the client, and then sales, and then web dev, or front end, back end, app dev, QA, or it could be client, server, database, API, and you can track what responsibilities belong in each column. And for a while back, this was one of my favorites because I prefer them vertically. They can also be done horizontally, moving left to right. But vertically, they move from the top to the bottom. So what I started doing was dividing them up into phases and realizing that in these phases, these teams are the most overworked. This one in particular, the far left column was the client. This was management, research, web dev, QA. And what we were expecting was kind of what you see here, lots of client and management work here, some research and web dev early on, lots of QA at the end, and then going back to management, presenting it to the client. But what we didn't expect was quite this much web dev work in the middle. So that allowed us to identify that early on, just kind of looking at our workflow and then taking literally an afternoon, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, or maybe it's 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock in one day with the whiteboard, and then I formalized it a little bit later, printed it out, stuck it up on the wall, and we recognized, wow, web dev has a lot more to do than we think it does. Let's prioritize some of these other things in a different way that will alleviate some of that stress so that nobody is beating each other up this week. This one we had like clients, sales, reviewers, artists, and this middle one was automation. Color-coded the different like internal software that we were using. So the blue colors, I believe Scott there was the yellow colors. That was the red colors, and the concept here was let's see how many of these we can push into the automation column, and that should allow us to just remove some responsibilities, remove some potential human error. There can also be sometimes horizontal. I love PERT charts. PERT, I had to write this down because I never remember it. Program evaluation review technique charts and critical path. And I realized that I screwed this up. I didn't have time to fix it. This should say task 7, not task 2. The concept here is that you estimate both optimistically and pessimistically how long each task is going to take. These tasks should be larger than stories, smaller than epics. And so let's say task 1, we anticipate will take between 4 on the optimistic side and 7 on the pessimistic side. We'll just call those work days. So that will take between 4 and 7 days. We recognize what from a 1,000-mile view, we recognize what the prerequisites are for the tasks, and then we can chart what we call a critical path. What's the quickest way that we could possibly get this done? So we add, this is the longest of all of the paths here, 535, 13 days. If everything goes right in the blue sky scenario, we could get this done in 13 days. Nothing ever happens like that. But if what we're looking at is we've got 3 weeks to get it done, maybe we could do it. Maybe we could do it if everybody was rested and caffeinated and happy. But it's more likely it's going to be closer to our pessimistic one, which would be for 19 days. So if what the client has given us is 2 weeks to get it done, and we're thinking that our pessimistic estimate of how long the critical path is going to take is 19 days, we need to go back to the drawing board, either change the scope of version 1.0 or see if someone on the business team can buy us another couple weeks in order to make that doable. And in terms of that, if you haven't read Mythical Man Month, check it out. It's awesome. So it's really easy to look at a task and go, oh, that team of 2, it's going to take them 8 days to finish that. Let's just make that a team of 4. Then it's going to take 4 days. It's going to take half as long if they got twice the people. Nothing works like that. I think us as developers kind of recognize that, but we need to understand that that's a limitation that other people don't really get. Brooks's law, adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. There are situations in which that's not true, but overall, if you graph that out over all of time, this law is going to win. All right.
Kind of like data processing.
Yes.
If you have a 24, it's going to be slower than a 16 core.
Yeah, it worked in weird ways. Like the math doesn't actually tell the story. It's like, oh yeah, 4 people, 2 weeks. That actually is going to be 1 week if we give them 8 people. It's like, no, they're just going to be stepping on each other and yelling at each other. So closing, summary, quick retrospective, what's next, and a thank you. Some common problems, just going way back to the beginning. Feature creep, design holes, issues lost to the ether. You want to avoid those. Feature creep is when you get seduced by something as a developer, you just start working on it. Design holes are when your design didn't actually deal correctly with the problem that you were working on. Sometimes you just need to take a little bit more time in preparation to identify those. Issues lost to the ether can be helped by using a Scrum board. One of the things about that is every idea goes on the Scrum board, and that's why you have a freezer. If it's a bad idea, just move it over to the freezer, but keep all of it so that way nothing disappears. We talked about Agile practices, specifically epics, stories, and tasks, and then sometimes subtasks. And the Scrum board, as I just talked about, GitHub Projects, we did a little demo of it. Trello and Jira are great. And yeah, projects, columns, tickets, labels, whatever. Retrospectives happen at the end of a sprint. So I've usually worked with like a 1 or 2 week sprint. Usually you get the team together for an afternoon or start with lunch or breakfast. We used to always do bagel retrospectives, and they would end up going until like 2 or 3 o'clock. What went well, what could use improvement, what will keep us moving forward. These can help ID patterns in design holes, and they can also help you like really understand where the weaknesses are in your team. Knowing what your weaknesses are is a good thing. Those are areas for opportunity, it's not problems. I think this is really important to do with solo work. So for instance, I think the demo actually went pretty well during this talk today. What could use improvement? I really wish that I had just another hour so I could talk about how we could use the statuses of tickets in GitHub Projects and talk about how pull requests can also be cards on those boards, and you can use those statuses to give you a roadmap. If you're interested in discussing any of that stuff, I actually really enjoy talking about this stuff, you can believe that. And what'll keep this moving forward, I think this web interface with links has actually worked pretty well. One of the physical manifestations that we've used in the classroom is a sailboat. So what went well are on the boat, what is holding you back are in the anchor, and what will move you forward goes up in the sail. Just kind of a silly thing. It also allows people to do drawings on there and have some ownership of it. And for some of us who think more visually, it gives us a visual anchor for that actual issue.
Metaphors are important.
Yes, exactly. They absolutely are. So exactly, what's next? Work smarter, not harder, or as I like to say, you want to burn brighter, not hotter. So I would encourage you to just evaluate your processes. Just think about what are my processes, or do I even have any? I don't know. Take a look at them, evaluate them. Think about what you could add, what you could take away. The easiest thing I think to just start adding are stand-ups. I think they're very easy to do, and you'd be surprised how quickly, sometimes within a week, your team will start working better, unless you really hate each other. But then talk with your team and consider the benefits. And one of the great benefits of working in this sense where you're kind of tripping over each other all the time, is that you get to know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and without even recognizing it, you'll start going, oh, I see so-and-so is doing that, I think I can help, and you'll start mitigating those risks before they start manifesting as problems. And then you're building proactive habits as a team. So like what you can also do is just like go ahead and spin up a GitHub project or a Trello board, share it with your friends, and experiment with it. I've seen people use Trello boards for like their book clubs and their game clubs and stuff, and just start figuring that stuff out. You know, you can do some pretty interesting things with it. And that's me. Well, that's actually not me. Those are the Beastie Boys. But thank you for having me, JavaScript Minnesota. This is my first time coming. I had not had an MGD since the 90s. It was kind of cool. If you're interested in any questions or making a connection or having a conversation, you can reach me on Twitter, email, or on the web. I believe everybody is burnt out and would like to move. So thank you.